July 2nd, 1943. The sky above Sicily trembled under the weight of war. A lone P-40 Warhawk dropped through the sunlight like a blade, its guns tearing open the fuselage of a German Fu-190. Below, the fields near Castelvetrano rippled under the spiraling shadow of a dying aircraft. And for a brief, suspended moment, the world witnessed something it was never meant to see, at least not according to the doctrines of Nazi Germany or the prejudices of the United States. The man behind the trigger was First Lieutenant Charles B. Hall, a young black pilot whose very presence in a fighter cockpit defied decades of American military assumptions. Yet here he was, carving a burning arc across the Mediterranean sky, forcing two nations to confront a truth they had refused to believe. What happens when the people a society dismisses as incapable rise higher than anyone expected, literally and figuratively? What does it mean when a single moment in the air begins to unravel entire systems of belief on the ground? This is not just the story of an aerial victory. It is the opening chord of a symphony that would echo across Europe, across America, and across history itself. Long before the Red Tails carved their legend into the skies of Europe, their story began in a country that doubted them long before the enemy ever did. In the decades after World War I, the U.S. Army War College's 1925 report cast a long, chilling shadow over every black serviceman who dared to dream of flight. It declared black Americans inferior in mentality, lacking the intelligence for technical duties and the courage for combat leadership. These weren't fringe mutterings, they were official doctrine, baked into military culture, shaping policy, opportunity, and expectation. Yet across the nation, a quiet defiance had already begun. Eugene Bullard had crossed an ocean to fly for France in World War I when his own country refused him. Bessie Coleman traveled to Europe to earn the license no American school would grant her. At the Coffey School of Aeronautics in Chicago, black instructors trained pilots with the same precision found in any elite civilian program. Every flight they completed was a rebuke to the assumptions written into that 1925 report. As storms gathered over Europe in the late 1930s, the contradiction between American ideals and American segregation became impossible to ignore. Civil rights leaders Walter White, Philip Randolph, William Hastie pressed relentlessly. Black newspapers demanded accountability, asking how a nation preparing to defend democracy abroad could deny it at home. Their pressure forced an opening. Public Law, 18 inches, 1939, ordered the inclusion of black institutions in civilian pilot training. It was not equality, but it was a crack in the wall. When Franklin Roosevelt sought a third term, political necessity widened that crack. In January 1941, the War Department announced the formation of the 99th Pursuit Squadron, an all-black flying unit, an experiment designed as much to confirm existing biases as to challenge them. Into this crucible stepped Captain Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., a man shaped by 4 years of silent isolation at West Point, where white cadets refused to speak to him outside of official duty. His resolve, born in loneliness, would later become the spine of an entire fighter group. Training at Tuskegee Army Airfield was brutal by design. Cadets flew more hours than their white counterparts and faced a 60% washout rate. Only the most disciplined, focused, and resilient survived a super-selected group, as Colonel Noel Parrish would later call them. They trained under constant scrutiny, aware that any mistake could be used to condemn not just individuals, but an entire race. In April 1943, the 99th arrived in North Africa, attached to Colonel William Maumyer's 33rd Fighter Group. Their welcome was cold. Missions were limited, trust was withheld, and on June 2nd, during the attack on Pantelleria, they entered combat for the first time, holding formation under pressure even as German fighters tested their resolve. No planes were lost, but the most important result was quieter. They had not broken. What came next, over the skies of Sicily, would prove they were ready for far more. The summer of 1943 would become the turning point, the moment when months of suspicion, isolation, and political pressure collided with the brutal clarity of air combat. Over Sicily, the 99th Fighter Squadron met its first true test. First Lieutenant Charles B. Hall had flown only 7 missions when he spotted two F-190 diving toward the American B-25. He slipped his P-40 into the narrow space between hunters and prey and fired a clean burst that tore through the German's fuselage. The fighter fell away, spiraling into the fields below Castelvetrano. That kill did more than ignite celebration among black ground crews. It shattered the carefully maintained narrative that black pilots lacked aggressiveness or technical mastery. But on the ground, such evidence still struggled against entrenched prejudice. Colonel William Maumyer filed a devastating report soon after, accusing the 99th of poor performance and recommending they be withdrawn from combat entirely. His words traveled up the chain of command to General Henry Hop Arnold, who began preparing to shut down the entire Tuskegee program. And then came Anzio. On January 27, 1944, the Luftwaffe struck Allied positions at the Anzio beachhead with overwhelming force. 15 pilots of the 99th Flying Warren P-42s against superior Fuffle 192nd met the attack head-on. What followed was 2 days of fierce, disciplined combat. Depending on reports, they downed between 8 and 13 German fighters more enemy aircraft than they had destroyed in the previous 7 months combined. Captain Charles Hall added 2 more victories, reaffirming the skill that had once stunned Sicily. The implications were immediate. A War Department study comparing the 99th to White P-40 squadrons found no deficiency. The experiment had proven itself not only valid but indispensable. With this validation came transformation. In May 1944, the 99th joined the 100th, 301st, and 302nd Fighter Squadrons to form the 332nd Fighter Group. Soon after, they were assigned a new mission, one of the most demanding roles in the United States Army Air Forces, long-range bomber escort for the 15th Air Force. Colonel Benjamin O. Davis Jr. gathered his pilots at Ramitelli Airfield and delivered an order that would define their legacy. "We cannot afford to lose bombers," he said. "Our job is not to be aces. Our job is to bring those bombers home." 7 In June, a new identity emerged. General Nathan Twining ordered distinctive markings for fighter groups, and the 332nd received red bright crimson splashed across their Mustang tails, spinners, and nosebands. The sight was unforgettable. Soon, bomber crews whispered to one another, "If you can get the red tails, get them." Their reputation spread not because they chased glory, but because they refused to abandon their charges. While other units broke formation to pursue easy kills, the red tails held the line. Formation discipline became their weapon. Loyalty to the bombers became their creed. The stage was set for a confrontation deeper inside Germany, one that would push them beyond reputation and into legend. By the summer of 1944, the Red Tails had developed a reputation for precision and discipline, but war rarely allows reputations to stand untested. On July 18th, over the heart of Bavaria, the 332nd faced one of the most punishing trials of their entire campaign, the Memmingen Raid. Colonel Davis led 66 P-51 Mustangs into German airspace, expecting to rendezvous with the bomber stream. But the bombers were late, and time drifted away in the stillness of enemy territory. When the B-17 seconds finally appeared, they brought a storm with them, nearly 100 German fighters diving from every direction. In those 20 minutes of violent, spiraling combat, the Red Tails fought to hold a line that had already been pierced. They claimed 11 to 12 kills, but the Luftwaffe's attack was overwhelming. 15 B-17 seconds were lost, flaming wreckage scattered across fields and forests. 3 pilots of the 332nd were killed, Lieutenants Robert Hutton, Wellington Irving, and Alfred Brown. Critics pounced on the losses, eager to reduce the Red Tails to a failed experiment. But the operational analysis told a different story. The 332nd had flown into an impossible situation and prevented it from becoming a catastrophe. They had met chaos with discipline. Yet the war had one more crucible for them: Berlin. On March 24, 1945, the Red Tails were assigned a mission of brutal scope, escorting heavy bombers on a 1,600-mile round trip to strike the Daimler-Benz tank works near Berlin. Intelligence reports warned that the world's first operational jet fighter, the Messerschmitt Me 262, would defend the capital. With a top speed far beyond any propeller-driven aircraft, it represented the final technological gamble of a collapsing Reich. As the bombers neared Berlin, silver streaks cut through the sky, the largest concentration of Me 262 seconds ever launched in a single interception. Lieutenant Roscoe Brown had studied their weaknesses: climb angles, blind spots, acceleration curves. Instead of chasing the jets directly, he angled his Mustang into the path of their turn, catching one in a sliver of vulnerability. His burst was measured, deliberate. Within seconds, the pilot bailed out a dark figure falling against a pale sky. 2 more jets fell that day to Earl Lane and Charles Brantley. 3 Me 262 seconds in one mission, more than most American groups destroyed in the entire war. For this, the 332nd earned a Distinguished Unit Citation. But triumph in the air could not soften the truths waiting on the ground. 32 Red Tails became prisoners of war. Among them was Lieutenant Alexander Jefferson, shot down while strafing radar sites in southern France. At Stalag Luft III, he found himself treated as an equal among white American POWs, an irony that haunted him. "Here I was in a Nazi prison camp," he recalled, "being treated more equally than I would be back home." When he finally returned to the United States, he was immediately segregated at the disembarkation point. The cost of the Red Tails service was written in more than statistics. But the numbers remain stark. 66 killed in action, 32 captured, 84 more lost in training accidents. These were not abstractions, they were lives cut short, stories unfinished, futures surrendered to the weight of a war fought on two fronts. And yet, their sacrifice only sharpened the truth the world could no longer ignore. Across the shattered skies of Europe, the Red Tails' combat record became impossible to dismiss. Internationally, even Germany, bound by its own racial dogma, could not ignore what it witnessed. Luftwaffe intelligence briefings began referring to the red-tailed Mustangs with a begrudging clarity. Schwarzer Vogelmännchen, the Black Birdmen. It was an acknowledgement born not of admiration, but of necessity. In the cockpit, ideology offered no protection. Skill did. To Allied bomber crews, the perspective was far simpler. They cared nothing for the color of a pilot's skin, only for the color of the tail guarding their flank. Stories spread through the 15th Air Force of tight red tail formations, of Mustangs that never abandoned a damaged bomber, of wings that dipped in a silent greeting before settling into a protective arc. These weren't myths. Air Force historian Dr. Daniel Hallman later confirmed the numbers. 27 bombers lost under 332nd escort compared to the 46-plane average for other P-51 groups. In the arithmetic of war, that difference was measured in lives saved. Back home, the reaction was more fractured. Black newspapers carried the red tails on their front pages, symbols of the WWII campaign. Victory against fascism abroad and victory against racism at home. But mainstream white publications often omitted their achievements or buried them beneath other headlines. The War Department itself rarely highlighted their success, unwilling to confront the contradictions it exposed. Yet politics could not resist facts forever. The Red Tails' flawless discipline and strategic effectiveness became part of a broader conversation about the future of the U.S. military. In 1948, President Harry Truman issued Executive Order 9981, integrating the armed forces. The Tuskegee Airmen were not the sole reason for this seismic shift, but they were a decisive one. Their combat record demolished every argument that segregationists had leaned on for decades. As the world transitioned from war to uneasy peace, the Red Tails left more than a military legacy. They altered diplomatic perception, reshaped internal policy debates, and forced the United States to confront the hypocrisy between its stated democratic ideals and its domestic realities. They proved that excellence, when witnessed repeatedly and undeniably, becomes its own political force. The world had seen the Red Tails. Now America had to reckon with what they meant. History often remembers wars through maps, statistics, and the mechanical geometry of battles. But the legacy of the Red Tails cannot be captured in numbers alone, not even in their 112 aerial victories, their unmatched bomber protection record, or the medals that eventually found their way into their hands. Their true legacy lives in the quiet defiance that carried them from the segregated training fields of Alabama to the burning skies over Berlin. It lives in the discipline that kept them beside the bombers when instinct urged them to chase glory. It lives in the steady hands that carved arcs of protection through clouds thick with flak and fire. When the war ended, there were no parades waiting for them. Many returned to a nation unwilling to acknowledge what they had done, unwilling to see what they had proven. Some carried distinguished flying crosses into jobs that would not hire them. Others, like Benjamin O. Davis Jr., pushed forward anyway, becoming the first black general in the United States Air Force and shaping the institution that had once doubted his very presence. Recognition came slowly, too slowly for many who deserved to see it. But it came in 2007, as the remaining Tuskegee Airmen received the Congressional Gold Medal, the weight of 6 decades finally began to lift. The Red Tails did more than defeat the Luftwaffe. They defeated the false theories that had tried to define them. They exposed the fragility of prejudice, how easily it crumbles when confronted with undeniable excellence. And they left a message carved into the memory of a nation, that courage is not bound by color, and that democracy demands more than slogans. It demands proof that freedom belongs to all. Their story asks us a question still relevant today. What truths do we ignore when we allow fear or bias to decide what someone is capable of? The Red Tails answered that question in the only way warriors can. They flew, they fought, and they came home carrying the evidence in their logbooks and on their wings. If this chapter of history speaks to you, share the lesson you believe matters most. And if you wish to continue exploring the battles, decisions, and human stories that shaped our world, consider joining us for the next chapter. History may be written, but understanding it is a mission we carry forward together.